Our weed of the week for this show is Virginia Groundcherry.
Virginia Groundcherry is one that Brian and I have been fighting since we were kids. We had it on our farm. I remember we were out looking at soybean fields and we were pulling weeds, and our dad said, hey, watch out. There might be some black nightshade out there and I want to make sure we get all of that. We don't want to miss any of that because that's a bad weed. So we got looking, and sure enough, we saw this weed and we thought, wow, I haven't seen that one before. That must be what he's talking about. So we spent some time, we cleaned up the whole patch, and we noticed it's a perennial weed, and we were trying to pull them. That root system, ran underneath the soil and across. And so I remember going back in saying to Dad, man, that was a perennial weed. I wasn't expecting that. And he's like, no, nightshade's an annual weed. What were you pulling? And so we went back out to the field and I showed him, and sure enough, it was Virginia Groundcherry, something at that point I had never heard of before.
All right, with any perennial weed, you've got to do a good job getting down into that extensive root system. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of choices to do that. But we do have Roundup, which is excellent in a lot of situations. So whether it's Burndown or in Roundup crops, you want to run with Roundup. But here are a couple of tips to controlling perennial weeds in these Roundup crops. Number one, you want to use a very strong rate. As high a labeled rate as you can get, you've got to get plenty of that product in the plant so you can get a lethal dose by the time it arrives at the growing points. Well, in addition to that, we don't like to see run lots of water with Roundup because we've got some of these weeds like Virginia Groundcherry where the leaf is a little bit waxy and it's hard to get much into the weed.
And here exactly is where a lot of guys fall down trying to control Virginia Groundcherry is, well, I used a 22-ounce rate of Power Max, and you know what, it kind of burned them off, but they came back. It didn't do a good job on them. No, you just didn't use the right rate. You got to use a strong rate when you got a perennial with a big root system like this. The other thing with Virginia Groundcherry is your timing. If you can get out there and control it before your crop is up, well, hey, you can use as high a rate as labeled. If you're out in the middle of a crop season, well, then you're kind of limited on what you can do, and you've just got to hold it back as long as you can and then try and stop it in the fall.
Well, what Darren's talking about here is you can use a much higher rate in front of the crop than you can in a Roundup Ready crop. In many cases, it might be 3 quarts, 4-pound equivalent versus 2 quarts or 1.5 quarts, something like that. So when you can use half again as much rate or double the rate, that's a big difference. And you want to make sure that you've got that effective rate that's out there. One other tip I guess I would throw out is avoid tillage when possible if you're going to spray Roundup in the next few weeks. What happens is you can kind of cut the plant, damage the plant a little bit. You want that plant actively growing. You want that entire root system tied together so the Roundup can get all the way through and kill the entire plant and kill it quickly. So Burndown's your best option. Using Roundup is your best option whenever possible. In the non-crop areas, usually Dicamba and 2,4-D, it's going to take multiple applications each year just to hold this thing back. But that's in many cases about all you can do with Virginia Groundcherry. You can certainly try some Tolerant or something like that to get complete control, but Virginia Groundcherry is definitely a difficult to control perennial weed.
Well, that's all the time we have for our Weed of the Week, but Iron Talk is coming up next.